Good afternoon, everyone. I trust you're keeping well and enjoying this rather unique online symposium experience. My name is Rolf Lutge. I'm the Managing Director of UCL Company, and I'm going to be sharing with you exactly how UCL is busy handling the rather large Midlands cane crop. So having a lot of sugarcane is usually a good thing. So what exactly is the problem? Well, it started about September 2019, where after an extended period of no rain, we started experiencing rather bad cane quality problems. This affected the back end of the factory. The mixed juice and the mesquite became very gummy, and we were struggling to run anywhere near our full capacity. And of course it affected growers as well. They were unable to send the full crop, and it wasn't long before we realized we can start running into trouble and facing rather extensive standover cane. Other millers were experiencing similar issues, so our normal diversions were curtailed and that door became closed to us. So we needed to start thinking out of the box in terms of how we were going to deal with not only the potential 100,000 tons of standover cane for 2019, but also the rather large crop that was expected for 2020. We formalized the process in January, where we did an informal estimate, and the growers responded by saying they've got about 1.175 million tons of cane out there that needed to be processed. So quite a large number for UCL, considering that our normal crush capacity is only about 800,000 tons in any given season, although we've beat that number a few times in the past. So that left us with a 375,000 ton problem that we had to find urgent solutions for. Now, normally excess cane is not a problem for us. It's part of our strategy, it always has been, and we've managed to cooperate with our fellow millers and arrange diversions. And as you can see from our history, there have been some years where we've moved large quantities of cane without any problems. 2013, almost 300,000, and more recently in 2019, we moved 233,000. So generally, it's not an issue. We can move the cane out, and life continues as normal. So what's changed exactly? Well, there are three main issues. Problem number one is that Umzimkhulu and Darnell closed for 2020, and as a result of that, cane was cascaded between the remaining mills owned by THS and Ilovo, and they were unfortunately unable to help us. So our main problem solver, our main solution, was taken away from us. The second change relates to the new cane varieties. Growers are getting significantly more tonnages off the newer varieties, and this has also allowed them to reduce their farm cycles from maybe cutting 60% of their farms on biannual cane, closer to about 50. So a lot more volume of cane has become available over the years. And if you just have a comparison here between 2004, which is when I joined UCL as agronomist, versus 2020, you can see how these variety changes have been significant. N12 has moved from 55% down to 20. That's a 35% drop. And N16, which was second in line back in 2004, has almost disappeared and is currently sitting as low as 2%, which is a 31% reduction. So these changes have been significant, and you can see that they've been replaced by N48, N54 and N31, and none of those are really a match for N12 in our district in terms of quality and RV results. And as you can see, it's a sign of the future that these varieties are simply going to grow in percentage compared to the total crush. The third issue that we've been facing is that in the last decade there have been significant drought conditions for extended periods of time, and more recently we've received good rains during the growing period from about October through to March. So that's meant that the new varieties are coming into their own, and naturally the yields per hectare are increasing accordingly. So we were really up against and had to come up with some fresh ideas. to satisfy our grower requirements, to make sure we minimize standover, not only from a financial point of view for grower and miller, but also from a pest and disease point of view, which brings a whole lot of other challenges in relation to standover cane. So we came up with what we thought were some innovative ideas, 4 in total, and they have yielded results to a varying degree, and I'm going to take you through some of those in the rest of the presentation. So intervention number 1 is not rocket science. What we did is we engaged our growers and said to them, chaps, we need to start the season earlier, we need to have more crush time so that we can get more of the cane off the fields. So what we did is we set a date of 14 Feb, which obviously required a very short off crop, and had to make sure we get both the engineers, the production guys, and of course growers on board. And that's exactly what we did. We fired up on the 14th of Feb. We put a couple of guys at the weighbridge with a big bunch of roses and made sure every driver got a red rose, and off we went. I've got to hand it to the factory guys. They did an absolutely fantastic job looking after the factory and doing all the maintenance within an 8-week period. It's the shortest off crop we've ever had, and ironically, despite the risk associated with that, we ended up having the most reliable performance we've had in recent history. In other words, we've had a fantastic 2021 following the short off crop, and so far things have gone really well. Things couldn't happen in the normal manner, and we had to spend a bit of money to make sure that we could get the work done within 8 weeks. We installed an additional millhouse crane. We did some investment in critical spares, and then also hired a few extra cranes on site, and of course we had to pay for additional man hours to get the work done over a 24-hour day. So in total it cost us about 1.65 million, and we were successfully able to start on the 14th. It yielded 200 Rand a ton for growers as well. It was an incentive that we decided to pay to make sure the guys come on board and finish their holidays early. And at the end of the day, we managed to crush 34,000 tons in those 2 weeks. And then from the 1st of March, obviously the new SASIAA financial year kicked off. Our second intervention was planned in such a way that it yielded the biggest return for us in terms of reducing the threat of carryover, and essentially involves reduced topping of the cane stick and leaving those tops in field. The main objective, of course, was to chase a reduced tonnage and to plan the whole thing very carefully in conjunction with growers. There's minimal literature available on this subject matter, and there were also few trials done by SASIAA over the years in relation to topping height. But there were 1 or 2 pieces of information available in some trial work, and essentially what it told us is that you've got to avoid cutting above the meristem. I think it's common knowledge that there's not much sugar in the top, and if you leave that behind and rather cut below the growing point, and that's where the debate heats up a little bit. What's the ideal height? 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, or 30 centimeters below the growing point. But essentially, we didn't want to see any leaf sheath. We wanted a clean cut, and that told us automatically that the guy was cutting below the meristem, and that was our primary objective. In determining the ideal cutting height, we first pulled out some of the old trials that I've mentioned. But these didn't have too much information on it. They were designed, or should I say, they were carried out on the coast. So the stuff was a little bit outdated and also a little bit irrelevant in terms of where we were situated out here in the Midlands. So we contacted Dave Wilkinson and Craig Bretsky here from the Newtsburg office, and they also provided some information of slightly more recent work that was done. Essentially, it was work related to testing the top few sections in 10 centimeter intervals of a cane stick, the sort of RV that was recorded, and what that might be worth. And we used that as a guideline to kick off the process and to figure out exactly where we want to go. In addition to that, Dave and Craig, together with Friedel Eggers from UCL, did a local trial to try and get some more updated data. They basically tested the RV and a control, as well as cut tops at 15 centimeters and 30 centimeters, and then recorded the cost of harvest, the cost of transport, and came up with a guideline as to what growers can expect in terms of savings and costs. In the end, the conclusion was that basically it grows within a 5-kilometer radius from the mill might lose up to 75 Rand a ton at 30 centimeters topping. So the damage was relatively minimal. But obviously, as the trial also showed, you get different results for different areas, and other growers will interpret their numbers differently. So in order to take the sting out of the debate, we ultimately decided to put in a moratorium to restrict the topping at 30 centimeters, and to pay the growers 40 Rand per ton RV, as I said, to take the sting out of the debate. That level of compensation, we felt, would incentivize the guys to do what needed to be done, and at the same time create an acceptance of the rules that we needed to introduce via the Mill Group Board to make sure this happens. So this is a brief summary of those compliance rules. I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but essentially, number one, minimum 30 centimeters topping. We would monitor that with cane in the weighbridge, cane in the cane yard, because remember UCL runs with a cane yard system and only has about 30% spiller. And then of course we were going to do in-field inspections as well. So we had to be quite strict about it because we needed 100% participation from our growers. We introduced a warning system, 1 warning, 2 warnings, and if a third incident occurs, then cane gets rejected. And if a grower has a clean sheet after 10 weeks, then the whole process starts again. So we thought that was pretty generous to give the guys the opportunity to fall in line and to figure out exactly how to do this, because a lot of the guys hadn't been topping below the Mary stem for quite some time. And of course, contractors had to get used to the idea as well to make sure that the grower doesn't fall foul of the new rules. So it was essentially a 3-strike system. We got buy-in from the Mill Group Board. And at the end of the day, everyone was on board to kick off this rather unique way of managing our tonnage. As you can imagine, there's quite a bit of variation in terms of getting the cutting the same, but we felt very comfortable with an average saving in tonnage of about 10 tons a hectare. Some guys were significantly higher than that, others a little bit lower. But at 10 tons, we can confidently state that we are going to save ourselves about 125,000 tons of material that was not going to come into the mill. Intervention 3 involved an ambitious plan to increase the mill's throughput. As I said, normally we aim for about 810,000 tons of cane. We felt that we could do more than that. And we made a couple of changes during the off-crop to make sure we improve our throughput as much as we can. Importantly, we recommissioned one of our cane knives in front of the shredder that had previously been removed. We modified the shredder washboard. We'd been experiencing some chokes, and this was probably the biggest contributor to the current year's throughput, ensuring that we have a smooth run on the front end. We put in new diffuser screens preemptively to ensure that there were no failures, and we also increased our exhaust steam pressure to make sure that the pace of the evaporators and the pans is at maximum. And we also then had a 3-year program coming to fruition in 2020 in relation to improving our OTE, and then also of course better cane quality due to the topping also means less issues in the front end, but also more importantly in the back end. So there was a big emphasis on cane quality because of the horror show we experienced towards the end of 2019. So we introduced some additional rules involving cane rejection. Basically, any cane that was tested below 75% but above 70% purity was subject to a 2-strike system, 1 warning, and the second time the cane gets replaced. And again, if the grower has a clean sheet over 10 weeks, then the warning system goes back to 0. In addition to that, any cane below 70% purity, 1-strike system, any test below 70%, that field was rejected unless it could be corrected, which isn't always the case. And in the end, we did actually reject about 3,000 or 4,000 tons of cane during the season. So we had to be very strict on the guys to maintain maximum throughput in the sugar mill to ensure that we minimize our standover at the end of the year. This was again supported by the Mill Group Board, of course, and if you have a look at these numbers over the last 5 years, you've got 2020 to date versus the stats 16, 17, 18 and 19. You can see how much higher the throughput is this year compared to previous years. So the guys have done a fantastic job in terms of throughput. And remember, this is from 1 March. It excludes the cane that we crushed in February. So the guys have done fantastically well to make sure we increase our throughput. And you can also see the cane purity at the bottom, almost 87% versus historical numbers. But I remind you that this number is despite the more than 100,000 tons of frosted cane that we had this year, which came in at very low purities and other quality parameters. So despite the frost, we were very competitive in terms of our cane purity compared to previous years. And that was primarily due to the reliability of the sugar factory and, of course, the reduced topping height implemented by growers. So in the end, the throughput intervention yielded, or we expected to yield, close to 51,000 tons of additional crush, and obviously that'll be finalized towards the end of the season. But if you add the actual and the projected together, that's the number that we're looking at. Intervention number 4 was very simple. It involves diversion cane to other mills, and that's easily calculated. At the start of the year, we did manage to divert some cane to Gledhow and Maidstone and a little bit to Newtsburg, and we ended up with a number of about 48,500 tons. So that is the amount completed to date, and as I said, that's simply a calculation of what's gone over the average. So if you look at the summary of outcomes, as I mentioned right at the start, we had a standover potential of about 375,000 tons based on the January estimate. The early start allowed us to take 35,000 tons off of that number. We estimate that with the topping restriction, we're going to save about 125,000 tons, and we're on track with that number if we look at the estimates that have been submitted to date. And then the increased throughput, we're expecting about 51,000 tons by the end of the year if we combine the to-date totals together with what we've got planned. And then, of course, the diversions get added to that at 48,500. So that leaves us with a current standover balance of 117,000 tons, which is obviously a far cry from that big number at the top, 375,000 tons. However, that's not the end of the story. There are 1 or 2 other considerations as well. Firstly, there may be room for a reduction in estimates. We haven't had the greatest rainfall since April once again, and some of the farmers' estimates have been falling. So we may have a reduction in the overall expectations in terms of cane volumes. There's also the option or the possibility of late season diversions. This sometimes happens during poor weather. A lot of UCL growers have a zone system, so when some of the other millers run short of cane, we're able to do some diversion. And then, of course, there's also every chance that we might beat our crush target. If the rainfall isn't as high as it can be in some seasons, and the factory continues to crush reliably, then chances are we might beat that 51,000 tons and add some significant tonnages in the last 2 months of the year. If I had to estimate what those 3 items might yield us, then I think at the end of the day, we've got a fair chance of reducing the standover tonnage to about 85,000 tons. And I think that'll be a success for us, particularly if you take into account that 50% of the standover cane will be less than 18 months old. We know that based on the estimates that have been submitted. So what I'm saying with that is that the risk associated with about 40,000 tons of that potential standover is not nil, but it is certainly lower from a P&D point of view. So that leaves us with about 40,000 tons of cane that we have to manage. We have to monitor it specifically for Aldana, and hopefully the growers will be successful in that. So how do we deal with these problems in 2021 and beyond? And not only are we going to have a bit of standover cane, but we're probably going to have a good crop next year as well. Well, there are a couple of things that we're going to do. The most obvious is to, of course, repeat some of the successful interventions that we've managed to implement this year. And we've got no reason to believe that that level of cooperation won't be there going forward. But importantly also, the board's made a decision to expand the mill's crush capacity. Our front end is already over design, and what we're going to do is expand the back end, put in an additional evaporator, an additional pan. We're going to widen the diffuser and one or two other supporting engineering feats, and that should give us an additional 150,000 tons of cane from the 2021 season onwards, which we're very excited about. So it's a very tight deadline, a lot of work to be done during the off-crop. Once again, we're going to be asking a lot from our engineering and production teams, and at this point we're planning to start up on the 1st of March with that additional crush capacity, and we're obviously hoping that we'll have a successful 2021. Thanks everyone for listening. We're going to head into a question and answer session, and I look forward to chatting to you.